Scott, a mission theologian working for Global Ministries. And this is a conversation on evangelism in a time of COVID. Let me start with a couple of tech details. First, you should all be muted, and other than our two panelists today, I'll ask that you stay muted. We're not going to be doing quite a question and answer format, but if you have pressing questions that you would like us to keep in mind as we're talking, please use the chat format to share those. You can find the chat function down at the bottom of the screen. We will be recording today's session, so be aware that that is in process. And without further ado then, I'd like to introduce our two panelists today and thank them for coming. So we have with us Dr. Jack Jackson, who is the E. Stanley Jones Associate Professor of Evangelism, Mission, and Global Methodism at Claremont School of Theology. And we also have Wesley de Souza, who is the Arthur J. Moore Associate Professor in the Practice of Evangelism and Director of the World Methodist Evangelism Institute at Candler School of Theology. So thank you both to Dr. Jackson and Dr. de Souza for being part of this conversation. So I'd say that the conversation is a conversation about evangelism, and especially evangelism as part of the larger mission of the church, and that mission after and in the world as it is being affected by COVID-19 pandemic, which of course continues to play out. See new headlines every day about how that pandemic is going. So evangelism is sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. And communication theorists say that news involves both a message and a medium. And so I want to talk a little bit about both of those components and how the pandemic has impacted both of those. So in terms of the medium, the means by which we carry out evangelism and the means by which we share the good news, we've seen some big changes to how the church functions and to how individuals function with new regimes of social distancing and a transition to many churches, at least temporarily, and many churches still, to this form of online church. So Jack and Wesley, as you're talking to people and seeing news about how churches are responding to COVID-19, how are these forces of online church and social distancing impacting the way that churches and individual Christians are sharing the message?
You can go ahead, Jack.
Oh, I was going to defer to you, Wesley.
Well, there's so much to be said here at this point. I think we have been informed by good research institutions on what is going on, but I'd like to just stay on my intuitions and my observations about how this has impacted the church. First of all, it is clear that in doing church in this time is a big challenge, and one of the challenges is to become relevant, and for some churches that has not been possible, probably because some have the wrong assumption that to be relevant at this moment is just a matter of adapting technologically in order to transmit, worshipers and preaching and things like studies and Bible studies and things like that. But the problem has become that pastors and leaders, those who are, presenting themselves and talking with people, watching through the internet or something, they have become so irrelevant in many ways. basically because most of them do not understand at this point what are the most important existential questions people are asking. In order to be contextual, in order to address the heart and minds of people, you need to understand some of the questions of the community. And I would say at this point here that communities are different. Therefore, we have different people in different questions, in different contexts. For example, if you have a church in Latin America where everybody is unemployed, they have lost, employment. What are the existential questions for those who are experiencing that kind of thing? The questions would be different if you have a church that is downtown. In our case, in Latin America, downtown means being richer than those who are in the suburban areas. The questions would be different. So I think there's a need for a fine exercise of recognizing what are the existential questions, and that in that particular matter, I think the church is kind of losing track. Therefore, the technological resources are not completely working in favor of building community and building faith and embracing people and facilitating people to join a community at this moment. So that's the only thing that I'd like to say at this point here. That's my perception. So the church has been affected much more on the content side and the communication aspect of a message of salvation that makes sense for this very moment that is deadly, that is dangerous, and that brings lots of existential questions.
Hello, friends. It is good to be with you today. And even as we start this conversation, I want to say that we're talking about churches and ministries, and yet in this time of COVID, and yet COVID is a very personal issue for many of us who have friends and family who are sick with it. So I want to acknowledge those and say we're supporting each other in our prayers during this time. I would echo much of what Wesley said, in the sense that it seems to me that churches always that thrive are answering the questions of people's hearts and minds, as Wesley said. And those questions change over time, and they change over time in every community. So churches that are doing a good job engaging their community are always asking, what are the questions there? And so now we need to be thinking, how have those questions changed? And at the same time, when we're thinking about evangelism, be thinking about how are we specifically articulating the gospel story. I think, again, churches that thrive over time do specifically articulate the gospel story, but they do it in different ways and with different means and with different tools. In brief, I would say that globally, a shift has, the coronavirus has pushed forward a shift that was going to take place everywhere, but in some places more quickly than others. And that is the shift of technology, in the sense of how technology is being used by churches broadly, and specifically in the task of evangelism. So for instance, now, I mean, churches that had never heard of Zoom and would never, ever have thought about having digital worship are having digital worship because they are forced to. Right? They never would have chosen this. And some churches are doing really, really well with it. We should not be confused by this. Some churches are doing really, really well. Some churches are not. And as Wesley said, even if you're doing well with the digital portion, if you're not asking the right questions, and if you're not proclaiming the gospel, then it's not the church anyways. So that's part of our struggle, right? But I would say, so two shifts that I'm seeing is that, especially as it relates to evangelism, is that this push that would have taken, let's say, 10, 20, 25 years for technology and churches to be embraced, has been embraced in more like 2.5 months. And that has been just a dramatic change that we're not going to know how this really plays out for a number of years, I don't think. And at the same time, I would say, to close, that the process of talking with people about faith has become more personal. So it is actually more important to be having conversations about, or it's only possible to be having conversations about the story of God in Christ with people who we're closer to, that we already have relationships. This idea of having conversations with people we don't really know well is just, it's going to be hard for a while.
I think that's a really interesting insight. I appreciate what both of you, yeah, not insult, insight. I appreciate what both of you said about the importance of addressing the big questions that people experience in their lives, and that those questions change by context. I mean, that's really one of the basic insights of mission and evangelism in the past half century, and so I appreciate that affirmation. And I think one of the ways in which we know what questions people are wrestling with is by talking to them. So, Jack, this notion that the sorts of conversations or the sorts of people that we're going to be able to have conversations with is going to be changed, I think really has some interesting implications. Can you say a bit more about the suggestion that we're going to be able to have conversations with people we know well, but not as much with sort of distant connections?
Yeah, I think that's just something I've been observing within my own church, and as I talk with pastors and other church leaders, mostly in the United States, but even around the world, is that on the one hand, people who know us and who are comfortable with the church are in many ways more comfortable now and want to have more conversations, I've found. People want to be connected with their Christian communities in ways that are pretty profound and that I think we took for granted previously. Now, that said, they've shifted. I've noticed in a number of churches, for instance, the importance of a Sunday morning gathering has become more important. In other churches, the notion of small groups have become much more important than Sunday morning, right? So a lot of churches, I mean, virtually all in the United States, but even around the world, a lot of churches are having their small groups via Zoom. And I know a lot of places where that has become the preferred community, whereas before COVID, people would have said, my preferred community, of course, that's Sunday morning worship. So in that sense, as the communities have become more intimate, I think those personal conversations have taken on a greater importance. And when I say personal, I'm meaning not only one-on-one, but within these small groups of 10, let's say 12 people. That should be very comfortable for Wesleyans, right? Mm-hmm. Where the heart of the Wesleyan movement has always been in small groups. And in turn, I think, and we've seen the data on this, right? People are attending not just one digital service, but multiple digital services who were previously Christmas and Easter people at best, right? So people are yearning for a community, and if they already had a previously friendly connection with the Christian church, even if they weren't a member, let's say, of one, they're looking for that dynamic and community, but it's still at a distance. Right, it's still at that Sunday morning, we're not having conversations together. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges over the next couple of years. I think we will come out of coronavirus, but I think there's going to be a hunger for still having some digital connection like this that's very personal.
And Wesley, this connects to a little bit of what you were saying too about the importance of connection for people in their context, but it being maybe a challenge to bring in new people to these small groups. Can you say a bit more about that?
First of all, I completely agree with Jack pointing out that some initiatives, particularly small groups, Bible study, conversations, sharing life, are the model, the form that is really working. And I see the conversational tone on those. Every time you see, that kind of communication between church leadership or even pastors and the congregation, where there's no conversational tone, um, uh, it becomes so ineffective. I have intentionally observed preaching through Zoom and other means, and I see many pastors struggling to communicate. They have been formed and trained to preach from the pulpit. They have not been trained to engage in conversation. I know there are so many obstacles to overcome in the process. But anyway, yeah, I see the need for particularly churches to stop a little bit more and reflect on the practice, on the way they communicate, and the way and the means they use to promote this kind of conversation that fosters growth in Christ and discipleship. And I don't think that the means, the media is the only way of doing so. There are so many other aspects of action that can promote that sense of belonging. Now, I see that there are disagreement on the analysis of how this has affected the church. And you can see that in everyday life. When you look at a pastor preaching, speaking to the congregation, you see a congregation of 8,000 members having only 50 people watching, that video. That tells you something about what is going on. And one of the things that are going on at this moment here is that we never had a shopping church going on as at this moment, because there are so many offers there. And I believe that we will have a huge problem of faithfulness as far as community commitment is concerned, and also as far as confessionality is concerned. So I think people are realizing they have much more options and more affordable sometimes, or more comfortable kind of zones to be through the internet, instead of being physically or staying committed to a particular community. So I think we are about to experience a huge wave of belonging problem. So I would say that we are experiencing a time of surfing. People are looking for the highest wave to surf. So that's why they are not keeping their faithfulness.
Yeah, I think this notion of the huge number of options that people have is helpful in showing some of the challenges. So many churches, not just in the United States but around the world, have gone online. You can watch streaming services from the annual conference in East Angola now, if you cared to, every week. And so there are just thousands, tens of thousands of options for how you could do church. And so even churches that do really well or do a really good online service, you know, what's going to make somebody choose that church out of the 10,000, you know, different options that they would have? And I think that that shows the importance of connections and relationships and what you were saying, belonging and community, even within this digital sphere, that this digital sphere is sort of an alternate means for that, but doesn't replace the need for real personal connections. Is that in line with what you would say?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That tells a lot about this moment. Of course, this is also an opportunity. We are, you know, in a very interesting time, and an opportunity to adapt. Because one of the challenges of the church over time is the incapacity to adapt. And at this moment here, we do need to adapt without losing the sense of the critical sense of what we are doing. We do need to think how people are looking for communities that take care of them, and communities that offer opportunities for them to take care of others in concrete ways. And that tells a lot about the need for maintaining the engagement and the mobilization to promote connection, to promote belonging. That's what I want to just add to this conversation.
Yeah, I like that notion of opportunity, and we've had someone ask, can you see good opportunities in the middle of COVID-19? And Wesley, you've given some sense of what are the opportunities you see for evangelism. Jack, how about you? What opportunities do you see for the gospel or for the church within this time? Oh, and I think you may be muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I think there are always opportunities and there are always challenges. I think one of the challenges for us right now is just to be honest and to say we're in a flux time and it's going to take a while to work our way through it. We will ultimately find a vaccine for coronavirus, for instance. That will come. It may not be for a few years, but it will come. And life will be able to somewhat turn back to normal. But the opportunity that's going to come is that this coronavirus, at least in parts of the world where technology is easily available for online kinds of interactions, is that it is going to change discipleship patterns. That's the way, when I think of evangelism, I think there's two main categories that have to be met. One is, how are we training people in our churches to tell the story of Jesus? If we're not training people to tell the story of Jesus, then we are not doing evangelism. And at the same time, the other side of evangelism, I think, is how are we setting up discipleship systems in our church that are actually helping to make disciples? A lot of churches, I find, I'm sure yours, all the folks on the call, I'm sure yours is different. You have a great system. A lot of churches I go to have no obvious discipleship system. And if we don't figure that out, then everything else we're doing is absolutely irrelevant in my mind. And I think going forward, ultimately in every part of the world, as technology becomes pervasive everywhere, and it will be everywhere in 50 years, as technology becomes more and more pervasive, more and more of our discipleship will take place digitally, and at the same time, it will always be personal, right? It will always be highly personal. Our relationship with God is, in the end, highly personal, and that will never go away. But how do we help people with that? So I think churches now that are starting to have the conversation about where does discipleship fit into the rest of or how does digital aspects of our formation fit into our overall understanding of mission and discipleship, then that will have a real impact. Speaking very much to today, I think churches that are having that are being able to really serve their communities in tangible ways right now. I mean, we're not really talking about that, but serving is really hard right now. just because of the dangers to people we want to serve and to us to go serve, right? And so that's just so hard. Churches that figure out how to do that safely and be able to tell why they're serving, that makes it that brings in the evangelism component in my mind. That can tell why they're serving, I think they're going to have a profound long-term gains in ministry touch points. Because I think, and this just relates, and I'll pause, it relates to one of Wesley's, I think, deep questions that I see in a lot of the communities I'm having conversations with. And it gets at the foundational kind of differences between Wesleyan and Reformed theology, right? Questions about where is God in this? Is this part of God's plan? Do I need to personally do anything in response, right? Do I have a responsibility to grace in this moment? Or do I just chuck it up and say, this is all planned by God and I really don't have anything to do with it? And, you know, Selah, Selah kind of thing. So I think churches that can come out and say, God is with us, God loves us. This is not God's plan, but God is with us in it. God wants to do beautiful things in your life and in your community, and we're here to be part of that. The churches that can really do that well in the coming year, I think, are going to have a really good next few years. And in turn, churches that can't do that, or as Wesley is saying, have a really challenging, I think we're going to have a very challenging life for mainline Protestants in all Western cultures in the next 5 years.
Let me ask, in the last couple of minutes here, let me ask you one last question, building off of a couple of things that Jack said. So Jack said that evangelism is about telling the story of Jesus, and evangelism is always personal. So as we close here, let me ask each of you briefly, are there particular stories of Jesus that have been resonating with you over the last couple of months?
That's an interesting question. I'd have to think about it. I would say for me, no, not a particular story, but I would say part of that is because I tend to think in kind of systems format. So what I am seeing that is having a really profound effect for churches that are worshiping online is those churches that are having people in their pews get up and share how they're experiencing Jesus, right? So I think this is as important a time as ever to reintroduce the practice of Christian testimony, for instance.
Amen.
I think this is a perfect to be having 2 or 3 minute video recordings of people in your church getting up and saying, what is your favorite story right now? How is the gospel really impacting you? Where are your challenges? Where are you disappointed in what God's doing? Where is God meeting your needs? Those kind of questions we can hear from the people. I think that will have a really and some churches.
Wesley, how about you? Any particular stories resonating with you in this moment?
Well, to be honest, yes, there are a couple of them. One is the story about the woman that touches Jesus' clothes. She was doing something to remain hidden, not perceived, just to touch the Jesus. There are so many. I know this is a metaphor that doesn't work for some, but there are so many people today. They are looking for opportunities to be touched, to rebuild dignity, to understand who they are, to deal with their fears, their diseases, not only physical but emotional and relational, and all kinds of questions related to what it means to experience and go through this pandemic, and also reflecting about life and the future. And I think evangelism is spelling out the gospel. It's not in just words, but in deeds, in signs, and of course in our lives. But it's basically changing lives and building dignity. And I see in that story of Jesus and the woman that came to touch him, that she was looking for dignity. And building people's dignity demand relationships and actions, even through the internet, that demonstrate love, peace, justice, and solidarity, that negates any dichotomy or dichotomization of the Christian message as evangelism and social transformation into separate purposes. Hence, we are in a time that we need to affirm a gospel message that incarnates and communicates shalom for people. That's the story that touches me. It's a woman, a person looking for something that is deeper than simply, a superficial thing.
Well, thank you both for sharing those reflections and for the entire conversation this afternoon. I think there's been a lot in here that's been really good and rich, and has been true of evangelism before COVID-19, and will continue to be true of evangelism afterwards. The personal nature and the importance of relationships. So thanks to both of our panelists. Thanks to all of you who have tuned in and watched this afternoon, and thanks to all who will catch this later on video. We will be back next month with more conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.